Okay, thanks. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. Let some folks come in. So if you were here for the Critical Infrastructure's Weakest Links talk, unfortunately they didn't show up, so you're going to have to deal with me for about an hour. Let the mass exodus begin. So instead, what I want to talk about is actually honeypots, so completely different topic than what you were probably expecting, so I apologize. But let's get started. I messed up my demo there. All right, so a little bit about me. My name is Greg Foss. I am the head of security operations for LogRhythm, also part of the lab's security research team. And so one of the main things I work on there is actually honeypots and active defense, and so I essentially run our internal security. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about is some of the things that we both, integrate with our customers and their deployments with our products and stuff like that, and also what we do on our internal network to both defend and attack back against attackers. So to start, let's go over some traditional defensive concepts, right? Organizations, you want to actually do a lot of things to try and protect your organization. So some of the things people do are, obviously maintain a tough perimeter. And then implement layered security controls. You want to try and make it hard for the attackers to get in and out of your environment. You want to have your firewalls, IDS, IPS, WAF, spam filters, all those good things, right? And then block all the stuff we know about, all the bad IPs, all the malicious actors, all the known attack vectors, all the known exploits, stuff like that we can actually defend their signatures for, those kind of things. And then we want to create and enforce policy to discourage the misuse of our computer systems by our employees, the folks who actually work for us. And then we just sit there and pretend that this all actually works, right? Nah, it doesn't work. No. Please. So, the truth is, there's quite a few realities when it comes to information security. There's no real one security product that's going to actually protect your environment, actually keep the attackers out 100% of the time. I work for a vendor, so that's saying something, right? You have to actually have people and processes and tools in place that are all commingled. You have to have a very well defined process for handling intrusions. Because it's when, not if. There's always some dude, like this guy, who's just clicking on stuff. You're going to open the door to your network, essentially. The other thing, too, it's not just APTs. It's not just these advanced adversaries that run script kiddie tools and break into us anyway, right? It's actually your employees, people that work for you, that can already be, bought, that can be coerced into divulging secrets about your company or selling your own software or whatever your most precious assets are, essentially. Or you can have systems that are just already compromised on your network due to the guy on the last side, right? So that's why I like the active defense approach. This is kind of taking it back to the attackers. For many years, we just kind of sat back and let attackers come into our network, steal all our stuff, and all we do is say, oh, we found the malware. What good does that do? Why don't we mess with them? Why don't we use some of their same tactics against them? So that's what this whole talk's about. So what is active defense, right? Hell yeah, that's exactly what it is. But actually, all I'm really talking about here is just simply tipping the odds in our favor as defenders. We want to essentially turn the tables on the attacker and use some of their own tricks against them. Why not, right? And it's fun to do. So we do this by, first and foremost, annoying them. We want to bother them. We want to make it very difficult and giant pain in the ass for them to break into our organization and get anywhere of significance. We also want to trap them and just waste their time. If we can have them messing with systems that aren't real and we don't actually care about, or stuff like that, then they're not attacking the real stuff. They're not going and stealing real data. So it's fun. We get to put them in an environment that we control, essentially, and then from there we can gain a lot of intelligence on them and attempt to actually gain attribution on them once we find out enough about these people. And then we get into the real fun stuff, attacking back. And I'm not talking about launching shells on people and stuff like that, but I'm talking about attacking back within reason and within your legal limitations. And we'll talk about that in a minute here. But essentially the main goal is simply reducing your mean time to detect and mean time to respond to intruders in your network. So I really like this tweet here where it's just talking about the goal of security engineering isn't essentially to keep people out. And a lot of people kind of get this misconstrued. But what it is you want to make this very, you want to make compromise very expensive. You want to make it very noisy and difficult. You want to make them trigger a bunch of alarms when they're trying to penetrate your network. So why internal honeypots? This is kind of what this whole talk's centered around. One of the things I like about honeypots is there's lots of different types of honeypots out there. They're very easy to deploy, they're easy to maintain because they're not real systems, and you can intermingle them with your legitimate systems on your network, so they look meshed in with your real environment. Essentially what these are just fly traps for anomalous activity, which is great because you want to know about when these systems are poked at. You want to see when people are trying to access things they obviously shouldn't be. And the nice thing about internal honeypots as opposed to like external honeypots on the internet is these things don't actually need to look very legit. You just need to have them be legitimate enough to raise a flag when they're breached. The nice thing about this too is you're going to learn a ton about the people that are attacking you. And this is very important because you want to see not only how they got in, but how they're getting out, what other avenues they have open in your environment. Because you never want to just, take this one system that you know is compromised, take it off the network and call it good. Because guaranteed they have at least 4 other ways back into your network. So you want to keep that in mind. Now, one key thing about this whole talk, though, is this is something to focus on after you have, standard security controls in place. You want to have the foundation laid first before you can take it to the next step by deploying honeypots. So, what are some use cases for honeypots? Traditionally, research. I mean, a lot of the security companies out there, us included, put honeypots out on the internet just to see what's going on. We want to gather data, we want to interact with the attackers, and we want to just see what's happening on the general internet and, help that develop our products and improve our product offerings. And then defense. This is kind of the meat of the whole talk, is we want to actually use honeypots as an actual defensive tool in our environment. So that's what we're going to focus on. So to help out with this, there's actually quite a few virtual machines that you can go and download and start playing with honeypots to better figure them out. The first one's HoneyDrive 3, which is a really cool project. Essentially, what this does is it has a compilation of tons of different honeypot technologies already pre-installed, pre-configured. They already have dashboards set up, all that good stuff. The problem, though, is this isn't enterprise ready. This isn't something you can just take and stand up in your enterprise and have it actually be something that's safe and believable to attackers. This is something that, it's more of a learning tool, something you can play with and say oh, these are great scripts. I should take these and put them on like a Linux box on my network. So there is another project that I really like that is more enterprise ready. That's ADHD. It's an awesome name, right? The Active Defense Harbinger distribution. So what essentially this does, it has a bunch of pre-built or pre-configured honeypots already built in. It also has a bunch of active defense tools already built in. It's a very cool project. You do want to do some tweaks to it before you use this in a real defensive scenario, but it's an awesome tool. Highly recommend you check it out. Now this is probably one of the most important aspects we're going to cover in this talk. Before you want to do any of actually, these active defensive techniques and, actually starting to mess with attackers and stuff like that, warning banners are something that's often overlooked in organizations, but it's very important from a legal standpoint because you can't go and start launching client-side code on the attacker's system without actually being implicated legally yourself. But if, when they're pivoting through your network and they're logging into stuff and they start agreeing to all of your terms and conditions that are laid out in warning banners, then it opens up the door for you. You can actually do a lot more once they've agreed to your terms. So this is something that's very important to implement if you are going to do any active defense kind of techniques. So what are some types of honeypots? This is my interpretation. There's a lot of different interpretations out there, but this is kind of how I broke them down. So first is no interaction. No interaction is essentially honeypots that act like honeyports. They just wait for a TCP connection and they log it or drop the traffic or whatnot. So not a whole lot there. Low interaction is more like static web pages and stuff like that look like something else than what they really are. And then medium interaction. Medium interaction is essentially honeypots. These are like the most common type of honeypot, where they actually simulate like a real service or real system or something like that. And then high interaction. These are essentially real systems or honeypots highly instrumented to simulate every aspect of a real operating system. And then my favorite, honey tokens. These could be drives, these can be strings, these can be folders, these can be documents, all sorts of stuff. So first, let's take a look at no interaction honeypots. So, no interaction honeypots or honeyports are actually very easy to configure. So this one example here, this is just a Linux honeyport, and all it really is just netcat and IP tables. Just a couple lines of bash. You can actually download the script from the Art of Active Defense, Offensive Countermeasures. It's a book by Jahn, Strand, and Asadoorian. They have it in the book. It's also in the ADHD CD. So a couple places you can get that, but essentially, it's just a very simple script that all it does is it waits for a full TCP connection, logs the traffic, and then bans them from that host, just using IP tables. Very simple. You can also do the same thing on Windows, just using netcat and netsh. You know, about the same complexity here as well. So a lot of very easy ways to do this, and this is something easy to push out onto a bunch of systems if you want to do honeyports. But there are also Python and PowerShell options as well that get a lot more verbose and have a lot more functionality. So the first one we want to talk about is this Windows PowerShell honeyports. This is a really cool project. It's just a very simple script by John Hoyt and Carlos Perez. And essentially all it does, you just run the honeyport script and define the ports that you want to imitate. And as long as you don't have those used already, you can spin up a honeyport on the box on those ports. So what we're showing here is essentially, it's hard to read, sorry about that. But what this is, they're just basically doing a netcat connection to this host that has a honeyport running on port 21. And so as soon as they connect, they get a success and it looks normal, right? But then they try and connect again and now they're banned from this host. So a very easy way to just stop people who are poking at your hosts from actually accessing them. And then whenever these are actually accessed, you get essentially verbose log messages that you can ingest into your SIEM or your log management system or whatever, and use that to correlate back against the real environment and see like what else this person's been up to over the past like couple days or something like that. So essentially, once you get a lot of these hits, you end up with a bunch of IPs just within your Windows firewall. Just say, hey, these people probed the honeyport, now they're banned from this host. So in Linux, there's an awesome project called Artillery. Anyone here mess with Artillery? Nope. Oh man, this thing's awesome. You gotta check it out. So Artillery, it's a very cool project. Essentially, what it does, same sort of thing, just a honeyport, but when they connect, they get a bunch of this junk back, which is kind of cool because sometimes it'll confuse people, try and figure out what it is. But the real neat thing about this is it has very verbose logging built into it. So essentially, by default, it'll just dump the logs into your Linux syslog. So very easy to ingest into whatever you're parsing logs with as it is. You can also push to local syslog, so you can just push directly from that box to a syslog server, or you can just set up your own flat file, so it'll just dump into another just Artillery log file, essentially. And same sort of thing. IPs are just added to the ban list and blocked locally via IP tables. Now, a bonus with Artillery, this is one of the other really neat things about it, it actually does full security configuration checks once you launch it. So it'll go through your web directory and it'll say like, oh, you have too many permissions on this directory, stuff like that. So it does a full like security review of your server the first time you run it as well, which is really great. But also, it includes file integrity monitoring built in, which is really nice, because so down here in this bottom window here, we're just simulating essentially someone uploading a web shell to the server. And so once they do that, we can see a new file was added to the server, and we get a very verbose message saying like, hey, there's a new file added, this is weird, here's the hash of it, here's the contents, all that stuff. So it's just a really easy way to figure out, to essentially monitor for your for any additions or subtractions or modifications or anything like that on the file system for free. Have anyone here ever run honeypots open to the internet? All right, good. Okay, one guy. So I like showing this because all I'm doing is just going to cat out the ban list from a Artillery honeyport that we had running for less than a day open to the internet. I just like showing how many people are actively probing at things on the internet. Like if you aren't running your external firewalls and stuff like that, you probably don't realize how often you're getting hit just from everything on the internet. And we'll talk about how you can actually learn from this and carve out exploits and stuff like that from some of the more verbose honeypots. But I just like showing this because you get poked at all the time. So let's move on to low interaction honeypots. So low interaction honeypots, I tend to put the web app honeypots in here because often they're flat files, they aren't too interactive, they just simulate the basic aspects of certain web apps. So this first one's called WordPot. Now this one's actually kind of old, but it's still a great tool because WordPress is one of the most commonly attacked content management systems out there. It's very popular. A lot of people configure this and they don't actually know how WordPress is set up and they don't do all the additional security configuration, stuff like that. So it's a great one to set up as a honeypot. The cool thing about this is you can simulate whatever you want. You can actually load real WordPress themes into it. You can make it look about as legit as a real WordPress site. It's just a Python script that you run, and essentially just as soon as you run it, you just pipe in whatever themes you want and stuff like that. If you are going to run this, though, I would highly suggest customizing it a bit because the version is very old. So as long as you change the version, it looks like it's a more recent version of WordPot. So just have to be careful there. But this one also just outputs logs to a flat file, so it makes it very easy to go through and ingest into whatever your log system is. Now, keeping on the same topic, one of the things I like doing is just cloning legitimate web applications and then standing them up as honeypots just by modifying form processors and stuff like that. So right here, we're faking a PHPMyAdmin, which is great because this thing gets attacked almost as much as WordPress because it's so common. This is very commonly misconfigured as well. A lot of people do leave default credentials on these things, stuff like that. So why don't we stand up our own fake version of this that's flat files so they can't actually do SQL injection, they can't do command injection, stuff like that, but it looks just like a PHPMyAdmin instance. So this thing, the logs here are essentially just set up so that it'll verbosely log any type of interaction with the web application. So it'll log if someone just visited the page, and it'll also log if they tried credentials that failed, and it'll log if they actually gained access. And then, like if you have like an inline IDS or you have some full packet capture capabilities in place, what you can do is actually grab the PCAP when people are attacking these things and carve out exploits. Like once they log in, you can actually find brand new attacks against PHPMyAdmin just by running honeypots. So it's pretty fun. So as I was saying, I like just cloning web applications and using these in scenarios where they look legitimate, but they really aren't. So this one right here, this is a SSL VPN service that we decided to clone. Anyone want to take a guess at why we decided to clone a SSL VPN service? Yes? Yeah, exactly. So harvesting compromised credentials is one of the great things you can do with this, because then you can determine whether or not people have real credentials, if they're just guessing, if they've actually compromised something already, you want to know like how deep they've gotten. But the real main reason I like using SSL VPN is because it looks completely normal to run Java on their system. So, because anyone uses VPN, they're like, oh, of course, I do need to allow this so I can gain access to more fun stuff, right? So this is great for like reverse phishing and stuff. If you see someone's already compromised a box and you send them an email and you know the attacker's watching, like, oh, here's this new site with all the secret stuff or whatever. This is a great way to do this and get actual client-side code execution on their system. So this Java payload that we sent them is actually Honeybadger. You ever played with Honeybadger? Honeybadger is amazing. Thank you, Tim Tomes. This thing is awesome. So what it does is it actually goes out and it scans all the wireless networks around you, just using your actual system because running code on the endpoint, and then it uses the Google Location API to find out your exact location by measuring the distance between these known access points. Because Google's already slurped up all this stuff, so they know exactly where you are. And it's pretty accurate. Like I ran this at my house, and it pinpointed like me in my office at my house. Like it's pretty good. So here's just kind of a breakdown of Honeybadger, because attackers aren't going to attack you directly, because that's dumb. They haven't done that for 10 years, right? They're going to go through proxies. They're going to have VPSs. They're going to use other compromised systems to attack you, because then it doesn't give them away as an entity. So right here, I'm just going through proxy here. So it looks like I'm in Switzerland. But really, running the Honeybadger payload, or allowing it to run on myself, you can see I was actually in Westminster, Colorado. So it's pretty cool what you can do to actually find out where some of these people might actually be. So let's move on to medium interaction honeypots. Now, there are tons and tons and tons of medium interaction honeypots. We could actually talk here all day about all the different medium interaction honeypots. So instead, what I want to do is talk about one of my favorite ones, and that's Kippo. Now, anyone here ever play with Kippo? Yes. All right. So Kippo's great, because what this does is it simulates a SSH service. So you can make this look like any of your other Linux systems within your environment. So it's a very cool tool to deploy. It's very easy to deploy, because it's just a small Python script, essentially, with a few other configuration directories and stuff like that. But it's just very customizable, extremely portable. Like, once you have this configured, you can push this out to multiple systems within your environment. And same sort of logging, too. It's very easy to capture these logs and pull them off into a central repository, because it's just flat files, essentially. But the really neat part of Kippo logs is it actually stores the full TTY session as well. So the nice thing about the TTY session is you can replay the entire session the attacker saw. So you can see like what they saw, what commands they ran, like if they had typos, like if they backspace and stuff like that. You can see real time exactly what they're doing on your box as they're doing it. So pretty fun to watch if you ever spin some of these up. The problem, though, so there's quite a few issues with Kippo in that it's very popular. A lot of people are using Kippo. It's out there all over the internet. And so a lot of people have found ways to bypass it and essentially find out that it's a honeypot right away. Like if you log into Kippo and hit enter 3 times, it'll break. And that's like a dead giveaway that it's a honeypot. So we see a lot of botnets doing that and stuff. So that's why I don't recommend this one for external use. I recommend this one for internal use when you're looking for like employees doing stuff or someone pivoting and stuff like that in the environment when they're poking around looking for stuff. Because another thing, when you deploy these externally, a lot of command and control servers, botnets, will essentially gain access to these honeypots and just sit there. They'll just keep using up bandwidth, so if you have like an EC2 instance or something like that, you can end up with an expensive bill. So just something to be aware of. The other fun thing with Kippo is you can use this on pen tests as well. So one of my favorite things is like internal pen tests. A lot of these environments have like configuration management tools going around scanning all the stuff in the environment. A lot of security teams, if they see like a new host pop up, they'll just run a credentialed scan against that box, which is funny because all you have to do is stand up Kippo and then just wait for some legitimate service to log in, steal their creds. There's all sorts of different products that this works on. So it's just another trick. If you're ever doing an internal pen test, stand up a honeypot on your little shared server that you guys are all sharing notes and stuff on. Just leave it overnight and see what tries to log in. You can use like Responder and stuff too to do similar attacks. So if you haven't messed with Kippo, I just wanted to show a quick demo of like how Kippo works, kind of what the logs actually look like, and what the TTY session looks like, and how you can dynamically alert on this stuff. So right here, we just ran an IP tables script. I apologize, it's pretty hard to read. But all we're doing here is we're just forwarding any request destined for port 22 to port 2222, which is where we're running the honeypot, default Kippo honeyport, or honeypot port. And essentially the reason we do this is because we don't want to actually run Kippo directly on port 22 because that requires elevated permissions. So if someone does actually exploit this or break out of it or whatever, we don't want them to actually have root permissions. So that's why we do that. So now we're just going to tail the logs. We have Kippo up and running, and we're just going to tail the logs. Now, the reason I like showing the raw logs, I mean, this is one of the reasons a lot of people don't run honeypots, is because it's a lot to go through. That's why if you're going to run these honeypots, you want to ingest them into some sort of central log management system. So right here, we're just doing some logins. We're attempting to log into this box. We did some invalid attempts. Right there, we can see there's the username and password we tried. And then down here, we've gained access. So now we're just going to run some commands. We're just going to figure out like what host we're on. We're going to, just do some quick stuff an attacker would normally do, right? So right here, they're actually pulling down some malware. So a lot of times when they gain access to a host, it's funny, you can tell when it's a bot too, because they'll log in with root, but then they'll download a local privilege escalation exploit and run it. Like, it's funny because it's just so ingrained in their scripts. But this is just a little example of some of the things you might see. The cool thing with Kippo, once anyone ever pulls down files to the host, it actually stores them in a separate downloads directory. So you can actually go through and hash those and then check those against your environment and stuff like that. So right here, I just set up basic email alerting. So whenever we are breached, whenever Honeypot's breached, we get a notification. Now what it contains is just a brief message like this honeypot was popped at this time and blah, blah, blah. And so this file is actually the full TTY session just replayed. Now the funny part, when I recorded this initially, this is a real attack. So if someone actually broke in, like as I was doing this demo, and I was just too lazy to record it again. So, so right here, we have essentially the output from the command. And I was too lazy to format it right at the time too, so I'm pretty lazy. But right here is essentially everything we just saw as the attacker on our end just sent directly to us and the security operations team to see like, oh, this is what they did, here's how they got on, stuff like that. Now if you actually use the playlog script directly, it's really cool because you can see them like backspace and stuff like that. You can tell if it's a person or a bot or something like that. So kind of fun. If you want to mess with that script, it's up on my GitHub page. And these slides will be up later, so don't worry about taking notes or anything. Let's move on to high interaction honeypots. Now, high interaction honeypots are super fun. These are essentially, we actually use these as a LogRhythm to figure out a lot of the new rules and things that we bake into our products. But essentially what these are is these are highly instrumented, legitimate systems that we have dedicated monitoring on. So just a couple of the tools that we use a lot of open source tools in our analysis and our detection and stuff like that. Well, this one of those isn't so free, but the rest of them are free. So of course we use our products. You know, we tie everything and we highly instrument them. We do very verbose logging on everything happening on these hosts. But then we also tie in Suricata. Now Suricata is not tied in the same way like that you might think. We don't have it like as an inline IDS. Instead what we do is like when we capture samples and we explode them and we're looking to analyze the malware, we actually set up a sinkhole that everything goes to Suricata, which is really cool because Suricata can dynamically interact with some forms of malware, which is very fun. But we also use Bro. So Bro is very powerful. Anyone here use Bro? Yes. All right. Bro is awesome. If you aren't running, I highly suggest you at least check it out. But essentially, that's the one we do use inline to gather a lot more data on seeing what's actually happening in the network and stuff like that. And we don't do a whole lot of blocking because these are honeypot hosts. We just want to see the data. And then Cuckoo, that's essentially what we use to explode the malware and test it and see, how it works. So it's not just actual systems that you can imitate for honeypots, essentially. So this is a project called Roman Hunter, or AKA the Router Manhunter. So this is essentially a high interaction honeypot, but what it is, it's actually a real access point that whenever people actually gain access to it, it just logs their MAC address. It's simple, right? The nice thing about that is you can take that MAC and compare it back to your real environment and see like, hey, is this an employee? Is this not an employee? Like, where does this MAC show up? Because a lot of times attackers don't change the MAC address when doing wireless attacks or just any attacks, which is kind of funny. Because that's like a basic thing you should be doing, to keep your OPSEC safe. But that's why this works very well. Now you can set this up as like, depending on how you want to gauge the attackers, you can set it up with like a web key and just like, okay, some script kiddie broke in or something like that. But if you do like WPA2 with a decent password, then that's something you definitely want to know about if someone breaches that, because then you're dealing with someone who actually kind of knows what they're doing. So lots and lots of warnings with high interaction honeypots though, because you're running real systems, you're putting real services out there, so it can be dangerous. That's why you do want to have someone dedicated to actually monitoring these boxes. Because when they're can be compromised, there's huge risk there. People could use these systems to attack other systems. They could download things that'll get you thrown in prison on those boxes. So you have to be very careful. Now, one of the things I like stressing here is never use an organization's gold standard image if you're going to deploy high interaction honeypots. So there's a case where someone did this, and essentially what happens is they deployed a high interaction honeypot, just Windows box, out in the DMZ on their network. RDP opened the internet with a stupid password, And so of course, like I think it was that day it got breached. But essentially what happened was they got on the host, but they dumped the local hashes from that box and then used those hashes to pivot into the real network. And it is bad. So don't do that. Use a brand new image, make sure you know what you're doing if you're going to deploy these things, and have someone watching them to make sure something like that doesn't really happen. And then segment. This would have also helped protect them if they segmented this host properly. Because DMZ, it still has a direct line into the organization most of the time. So you do want to segment these properly. So let's move on to honey tokens. We're going to talk about document bugging and tracking files and stuff like that. So file integrity monitoring is actually very easy to configure. Essentially, you can do this just within Windows itself. All you have to do is go to the advanced properties and configure file integrity monitoring on these hosts. And what this does is it generates verbose logs when these files are interacted with. This is a very cheap, easy way to do this. There's also a lot of tools that are out there that give this functionality as well. So honey tokens are essentially what we're talking about here. We're either using legitimate documents and bugging them, or creating fake documents that will be high-value targets for, red teams, attackers, those types of folks that are going to be going after your network. And the cool thing about this, we're not just talking about just files. These could be strings, these could be database entries, these could be, whatever you can imagine, really. As long as it's something that you have predefined in your detection capabilities, then you know when it's being interacted with. Whereas, other systems that, you aren't actually watching this closely, you might not. So this will help kind of highlight some of the issues, some people accessing things they shouldn't be. So let's talk about document bugging first. Now, there's actually a whole talk on document bugging I saw earlier this year. It's a really cool talk. This bugged files is your document telling on you. Highly recommend checking that out if you want to learn more about like all the different ways you can bug files and stuff like that. And then web bug how to, this first link, this just shows you like what web bugs are, why they work, how they work, kind of the basic high-level details of what web bugs are. And then Webbug Server is essentially some software that you can use to detect web bugs. So by default, you can pull them out of your web server history and stuff like that. But if you use Webbug Server, it actually stores them in a database and keeps them, essentially makes it easier for you to go through and actually figure out, what's a web bug and what wasn't a web bug. So kind of helps segment that. So the fun thing about this stuff is document tracking is essentially, it's all just the same tricks that marketing and sales have used for decades, right? Essentially, whenever you load images in emails or like in a document or something like that, there's chances that it can call out. And so that's essentially all web bugs are. So right here, this is an app called Sidekick. It lets you know like when people read your Gmail and stuff like that. But down here in the bottom left, that's actually just a web bug. All it is an image tag that calls back to the server. It has specific traits, like it shows what the ID of the page you were looking at was, what your ID is, like all these other unique indicators that when they receive this communication, they know exactly what it was. And that's all we're really talking about here. Because the cool thing about documents, and bugging, Word documents and stuff like that specifically, is the fact that these Word documents are essentially just glorified web browsers, really. Because you can load HTML content within Word. So what we do here, right in this little picture here, is just a simple document. It's just a web page that we've labeled as a document. I mean, that's all you really have to do to create a valid web bug. Now, one of the problems with web bugs, though, is it takes a little bit of time to create these and inject these, especially into existing documents, because you have to change the whole formatting of the document, because by default, documents aren't saved in HTML format. So what we decided to do is I just put together this little script to go through and take like a whole list of files. So say you have like 500 systems that you want to put web bugs on. You just go through and load them into this file, and then it'll go through, and if the files exist, it'll bug those files. And if they don't exist, it'll just create a new file with a web bug in it. So if you want to mess with this, you can get that at my GitHub there. But before you do any of this stuff, just be aware there are lots of issues in terms of document bugging. Because if these guys decide to open this up offline, they're going to see that your document's trying to call back somewhere. And it's a dead giveaway that your probably tracking them, or you're trying to at least. So you just have to be aware of that. Like, don't leave like webbug server in the URL and stuff like that when it calls back. One of the other things we do to make this look more legit is we use the company logo as the image that's loaded. So like when it loads and they actually see an image pop up, they're like, okay, you know, this may be kind of legit. Whereas like if it's just a white square or they don't see anything pop up, then they'll get suspicious, because a lot of attackers know of these tactics as well. So let's kind of bring all this together and go through a fun little case study. So anyone here read the recent stories around the CEO, CFO phishing scam kind of stuff that's going around? Yeah, it's hitting probably everyone, where they're doing just basic wire fraud transfer attempts. So this is one of those, and we decided to mess with them because we're getting tired of it. Our finance team was getting very tired of getting bugged by this all the time, so we decided to comply with our CEO, right? So what we did is we just set up a fake admin assistant, and we just all started monitoring that inbox. And so what happened was, right here is essentially the reply back to the scammer, where he's asking the CFO to perform a wire transfer. And the CFO is a busy guy, right? So he has his admin assistant do this for him, aka us. So as soon as he sends this reply back, telling him to work with Paul, his admin assistant, we actually get an email directly to the admin assistant. And so from here, these are just the headers from his email here. And we can tell a lot about this dude just from his headers. So first we can see the reply to goes to ceodesk1@outlook.com, which is, it's super believable, right? And then the highlighted portion is actually his real email, because he uses real email account to actually send these scam campaigns out. So using that, we found a LinkedIn profile, pretty legit. And so, I mean, it was fun. We found some other stuff too, but it's not as funny as his LinkedIn. But what we decided to do was make our own wire transfer form. This is our super crappy wire transfer form that we sent him back. It's funny because I'd never even done a wire transfer before, so we had to like figure this out real quick. So, but essentially, we put some like ridiculous numbers in there and make it look like an official document and stuff like that. But the key part, if you see down at the bottom here, it's kind of hard to read in the back. We actually said, click here to digitally sign and submit this document. How ridiculous is that? Well, it's about this ridiculous. It gets even more ridiculous. So, I mean, that's like not believable at all, but we were like, all right, we've got like 20 minutes, let's throw this together, send this back. So essentially once he signs the document, we have the message up there, please enable Java. Because you need Java to sign documents, right? Of course. Made sense. So we sent him an email back. We want to be super friendly, because it's our CEO. We'll be very nice to him. So we sent him an email back, and we're like, oh yes, we'd be glad to get that processed for you. Here, have you filled out the form yet? If not, we've attached one for your convenience. So we sent him the form back, and we're like, all right, let's see if this works. So as soon as we sent it, it was like literally minutes after we sent this, he actually opened the document, and we get a web bug callback, which is sweet, right? So it's funny, like, you can actually tell a lot just from the web bug callback. So, of course, we get his IP address, which is good, you know, unless he's proxied and stuff like that. But one of the most interesting aspects, I think, is actually his user agent string, because we can tell what type of system he's on. We can see he's on a little Asus tablet PC using Windows, which is good for us, because if we wanted to further attack this guy or, you know, try and do some other stuff to him, then we know kind of what platform he's on, so we can tailor our code to work with his system. So tracing his IP, of course, goes to Nigeria. Where else would it go, right? Well, the funny thing is, it's actually not all Nigeria. Now, there's stuff I can't show here, but essentially, one of the key things is this did go back to a person within the U.S., and it went to a bank within the U.S. as well, actually out in California, which, you know, is kind of interesting, right? So just fun to kind of mess with these guys. And this is how you actually gain more intelligence on these people, as opposed to just, oh, did you report the email? And, you know, actually stopped it and stuff like that. And another thing they did is essentially put physical processes in place for the finance team as well. So any of these things that come through, they have to have physical verification. They'll go like walk over and talk to the person before they do any of these things. So you have to add these controls in as well, along with just messing with these guys. So speaking of messing with attackers, there's a lot of other fun tricks you can do to just piss people off. One of my favorites is zip bombs. Anyone here ever mess with zip bombs? Yes. Zip bombs are so fun. They're evil. They're just evil. So this one right here, if you go to unforgettable.dk, there's this file you can download called 42.zip. And so what this does is it essentially is like 16 or 30 or something like compressed zip files compressed within other zip files, and like it's this crazy amalgamation of zip files. And so once they expand this thing, it expands to 4.2 petabytes. Like that'll crash a supercomputer. So like it's just fun, right? Now the other fun trick is the browser exploitation framework. So Beef. And the cool thing here is we're not talking about like using it on pen tests where we have to find a cross-site scripting bug and exploit it and stuff like that. You own the environment. You know where the attacker's looking. Why not just add a Beef hook in one of these pages? Then you can like dynamically rickroll them. You can like do whatever. You can pop shells on them. Beef is a fun tool. Highly recommended if you haven't played with it before. Now this one, I actually haven't done this because I'm afraid to build one of these, but USB Killer is an awesome project. Essentially what it does, it turns the USB into basically a battery. So like when you plug it in, it fries your CPU. So that'd be fun if someone physically, you're worried about someone physically stealing something or whatever. Mostly I just wanted to include it in here because I think it's awesome. One of my favorites is Mr. Clippy. Now with this, you can actually use any image you want. Essentially, it's just a PHP IDS plugin that just shows images when it detects known attacks or known traffic or however you decide to configure it. So you can just taunt people with it. It's kind of fun. But one of the most, surprisingly, this is like one of the most useful honeypot kind of things I've seen, because this just confuses the shit out of people. And they'll just sit there and mess with this for a long time. So funny. So what we're doing is we're just catting dev random out to netcat. That's all it is. It's like, it takes 2 seconds to set up, and you can mess with attackers for hours with this thing. So funny. Because they'll just sit there trying to figure out what all this junk is. It's hilarious. The good thing is, when they're trying to figure this stuff out, they're not going after your real systems. Now you can take it a step further if you just want them to definitely know you're trolling them. By sending them little ASCII art movies when they connect to your box. So right here, we're gonna play a little video. So they're just gonna telnet in right here. You can download the code for this at the link below there too. So as soon as they connect in, they get rickrolled through ASCII art. This is fun, right? Just mess with attackers. It's fun stuff. So the key to all of this, though, is actually tying everything in. You want to have some central team that's monitoring all this stuff. That, as fun as this is, you do need to gather actionable intelligence from this. If you're going to, have business buy-in to set any of this stuff up. So you want to have, your dedicated monitoring team ready to respond to these threats, ready to actively defend your network, essentially. So we want to tie in, all of our security tools. We want to have kind of a, at least one view of the whole network where you can actually see like the honeypots being interacted with and the real network. We want to tie those together and see how they all relate, right? And so once we do this, once we actually have kind of the basics in place, we have our monitoring system up, we have honeypots in place, we have sensors, you can actually start to gather enterprise threat intelligence, or I like to call it context-aware threat intel, because this is the stuff that's affecting you directly, and probably similar folks in your like industries. Because say, you're in retail, you're going to be attacked completely differently than, say, a hospital will, or a bank, or a government. All these different groups, a lot of them do have threat intel sharing rings, but a lot of them don't. This is something that would be great for people to start doing. Set up like a CRITS database and actually pull in some of the data that you're seeing and then share this with the similar industries, with folks in your like industry. Because essentially, what it all comes down to is event correlation, right? So, Now, once you know about this stuff, part of it is actively responding to it. So one of the things we like doing, we call it dynamic honeypotting. Essentially what this is we take a system that we see as, probably compromised. We saw some weird stuff on it, but it was like a legit system. It's probably someone's desktop or something like that. What we want to do is dynamically turn this into a honeypot. There's one little trick that we do to do this, aside from like actually tying this into our SIEM and pulling the logs and everything like that. We want to enable command line and PowerShell logging. So there's actually I don't want to go through all the details of this because there's a really good post by Hacker Hurricane, Michael Go. I don't know if you guys ever read his stuff, but he's done some great overviews of how to do this. He also has like the Windows logging cheat sheet. If you implement those dynamically, you can dynamically turn a system into a very verbose honeypot and just see what's going on there. So watching the command line activity is how we catch a lot of the weird stuff going on the network. So along the terms of automating our response, there's a bunch of tools out there that'll do this for us. Essentially, Google Rapid Response, Netflix Fido, Consa by Dave Hull, and then Power Forensics by Jared Atkinson. A lot of really cool projects out there that allow you to automate incident response and automate the intelligence gathering, automate the, actually configuring of like your incident response team and setting up those processes and things like that. There's tons of free resources out there, so I highly recommend you check some of these out. So I wanted to play in this space too. So I suck at PowerShell, so I wanted to learn how to do it a little better. So I decided to create PS Recon, short for PowerShell Recon. And all it really is, this is a dynamic PowerShell script that remotely pulls data from a host, and you can do other things like disable users in the Active Directory, lock the host down, essentially disable all their network connections, and a few other things. Dynamically report to the security operations team, stuff like that. And so the reason I built this is we tie it in with our SIEM, essentially. You can tie this in with whatever your processes are. But whenever specific events are observed in the environment, we just essentially fire this off. And we go pull some forensics data from this host and just see what's going on in there. See if there's anything else that we need to dig into further. But this gives us a good, quick snapshot of some high-level information on the host. Now, whenever you run this, you can have it set to send emails out. So it creates this HTML report that basically breaks down, a bunch of the details on the host. So once it gathers these details, it fires this report off to the security operations team. So they have this information. Now they can start going through, and you have multiple eyes on the system all of a sudden, within a matter of seconds, as opposed to like hours with some of the other tools that are out there. So that's all it is. If you want to check it out, the link in my slides. But essentially, now we've talked about, honeypots, response, and some of the ways you can mess with attackers. How do we actually bring all this together, right? One of the main things, very important aspects, is a dashboard. You want to have something where you can see, the whole environment. You want to see all your honeypots, and you want to see how they relate to the real environment. So HoneyDrive 3 actually comes with tons of different dashboards just built in. The cool thing there is you can choose like which dashboards you want to actually use. And then when you set them up in the real environment, you want to have them segmented so they're like, no one's actually going to access the dashboard and then find out the host they were just poking at's a honeypot and stuff like that. Kippo Graph's one of them. So since we talked about Kippo, want to include Kippo Graph in there. And the Modern Honey Network. Now this is a really cool project. There's actually a talk at B-Sides Las Vegas on this, and I think they did a workshop as well. But essentially what this is it's an awesome project that it's not only a dashboard where you can monitor honeypots, but you can actually dynamically deploy honeypots. Now these are more medium interaction honeypots that resemble real systems, and you need dedicated IPs for each of these. So that's why I didn't focus on them here, because I'm talking about intermixing honeypots with real systems. But this one's great if you want to just put out honeypots, especially for throwing them out on the internet. And then of course, best one of all, right? So this is the honeypot that I decided to put together for within our software. So essentially what I want to go through is some of the key pieces of data that you should be capturing within whatever tools you're going to use. So first and foremost, you want to gather the IP address. You want to see who's poking at you, who's attacking your system. And then trending. You want to look at the trending that you're seeing within the honeypots as it relates to the rest of the environment. Then, top usernames. Find out if people have real usernames, fake usernames, all that good stuff. Then passwords, same sort of thing. And then honey token file access. So if anyone's actually poking around in these directories where they shouldn't be, gathering files, stuff like that, we want to know about it. Then user agent strings. I like breaking this out because it shows what tools attackers are using in your environment. As long as they're hitting like your web interfaces and stuff like that. Because the funny thing is, people don't often bother to change the user agent strings. Payloads. So any files that are pulled down to any of your honeypots, we're going to gather the URLs these were pulled down from. These are great to go poke at, by the way. There's a talk at GrrCON last year, actually, by Elliot Brinkman. And it's pretty cool. He actually logged into some of these boxes. He like went and poked back at them and like showed a lot of really cool details on their hosts and stuff. So definitely check that out. It's a fun topic. And then directionality. We want to see where these attacks are coming from. Like if they're coming from external, internal, if they're already on one of our hosts. Like we want to see that. And once we have that, we have a very high-level dashboard of all the events that we're seeing on our network. So with that, we're almost out of time. So I just want to go through a quick list of some recommended reading. See, these are some of the sources that I used putting this talk together and some of the research together and stuff like that. And so I highly recommend all of these resources up here. The first one, Offensive Countermeasures by Jahn, Strand, and Asadoorian. It's an incredible book. It's not too long either, but it's like full of great ways to actively defend your network. The next one, Blue Team Handbook. This is just a great overall book for incident response. It's a really good book just to have on hand for when you have to actually initiate an incident response. And then Logging and Log Management. I know this is way up everyone's alley in here, but it's actually a very good book. If you want to implement logging and you want to do this the right way, this is an excellent resource to do that. Now this last book, Reverse Deception, this one's a little different than these other ones. This is actually a counterintelligence book. But this one's fun because it talks about some of the tricks that like government uses and stuff like that, like CI groups use to actually do reverse deception. So it's kind of fun. So with that, I think we might have a couple minutes for questions. Yeah. If not, thanks so much, guys.